All right, well, hi everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Heromakers podcast. And we are having a great time in season 3, aren't we?
It's great.
I feel like I want the last 6 months back of my life when we took off doing this podcast, because we are like hitting episode 60 roughly in this thing. And I'm reminded because before we started recording, we were talking to our current guest and who leads a nonprofit. And I was thinking how we have talked to, I would say, a good 2 or 3 dozen nonprofit leaders, which is kind of a common thread, it seems, that we have built, and just the unique challenges of that. So maybe we'll get into that, maybe not. Okay, and well, let's introduce our guest here, Charles Lerner. Hi, Charles. How are you?
Hi, Laurie. Hi, Ann.
Hello.
And Charles is head of this great organization, this great nonprofit called At the Crossroads, which helps youth who are experiencing homelessness in the Bay Area around San Francisco. But sometimes, Charles, you were telling us that you are actually on the East Coast working remotely. So we'll have to get into that as well. But I love this, Charles, because we have talked to a number of people who work in the area of homelessness, families, kids. I remember season 1, we talked to a woman who leads this school in Oklahoma City called Positive Tomorrows. And Charles, this is fascinating. So the school is only for children who are homeless. It is a private school. And so we talked about all the challenges of homelessness, like the unique challenges in children. And so very, very fascinating. So this topic is one that we care deeply about here on the podcast. So we're very grateful that you have joined us on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yep. And Charles, let's start by you telling us a little bit about your own journey, like growing up. Where did you grow up? And a little bit of your own experience. And then we're going to get into At the Crossroads and what you do there and the issue of youth and homelessness.
Okay. So I grew up in South Florida, actually born and raised in Fort Lauderdale. If I'm freezing, by the way, let me know.
You're great. Yeah.
Oh, great. We always find the perfect time to freeze during these Zoom calls.
Yeah.
So I grew up in South Florida. I was actually born in Fort Lauderdale and spent the first close to 5 years in foster care. My mother was a very young mother. She was 14 when she had me. And so as one can imagine, I can't imagine a 14-year-old that would be prepared to care for a child. I'm sure they're out there, but certainly my mother was not in a position to care for me. But it's not uncommon. There are many teenage parents out there, and not all of those children end up in foster care. But the only way they don't is if there's extended family or grandparents or others to step in. But that was not the case in my family. So I was in foster care. Was in 7 foster homes by the time I was 4. And, we certainly could talk about the experience of foster care. And by the way, how it relates to the current work that I do. But I was adopted at 5 into what became a very large family of adoptive children and foster children. And that had its own challenges. So there were definitely some challenges in that family system.
And then was this still in Florida? Were you still in Florida at the time? Okay.
Yeah, still in Florida. And, we were talking about being a parent before we came on. There's a lot of stories within adoptive families and the adoption community and that are untold. And sometimes the untold stories are the stories of adoptive parents that struggle just like birth parents or parents that have children through birth or other forms of having children. And so, I think I say all the time, my adoptive parents were really great at quote unquote rescuing people and things. But then once they did, I think they really struggled to take on the responsibilities that they were committing to. And so it was a very difficult household to be in. And
when you say big, how many were in your household?
Oh gosh. So I was the third, when I was adopted, I was the third child, and my parents adopted 3 more children after me, and also did foster care on and off through most of my childhood. So at any given time, there were 5, 6, 7, 8 children in the house, and keeping in mind that a lot of children who are in foster care come. I mean, they've experienced a lot of trauma and have particular needs that really need a lot of attention, a lot of focus, and a lot of investment. And so it's really hard to do that for 6, 7, 8 children at a time. And so, we all handle that adversity and that trauma in different ways. And, for me, I had my mindset on, being as productive as I could, having as many distractions, and just channeling a lot of what I was going through as a kid, which was probably back then, I'm 45. So back then, like, we didn't have the same language, but I was probably experiencing depression. I certainly had PTSD and a lot of, had a trauma history. And so I was working under the table at 12, 13 years old, working in a warehouse to make money, putting money away, playing tennis, working as much as I could work. Because, my goal was to, get out on my own as quick as I could and get out of that house and never look back. And so that's what I did. I moved out of my house, my senior year of high school, had everything that I owned in my car, just making calls, seeing where I could sleep and rest my head until I figured it out. And I was really fortunate, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, but so this idea of acute homelessness versus chronic homelessness. And, I experienced acute homelessness. And the only reason why it was a one-time, short-term situation for me was because I had a woman in my life who was the mother of one of my close friends who had gone away to college, who knew my circumstances. My friend called her because I wouldn't, and said, this is what, Charles is going through. And she said, our house is his house. Like, let him know he can come stay. And I never would have asked for that. But so that, like, month or two really changed the trajectory of my life, because I had somebody that extended themselves and made me feel like they were doing it because, not out of charity, not out of like obligation, but because they cared for me and they felt that I deserved that support. So yeah, I'll stop there because I can go on.
That's interesting. And it's reminding me of the quote by Fred Rogers that I'm sure you've heard before, which is like, look for the helpers, right?
Yes.
And oftentimes they're people that we know. So like, I'm struck by this woman who knew you, right? And so she had kind of this this already established relationship with you. Was it surprising to you, or did she kind of show characteristics that when she did invite you to stay with them, you weren't surprised by that?
It's interesting to look back. I think all of us can do this, where you look back in your life and you say, like, what didn't I know then that I know now? What was I not connected to? Like, I think when you've experienced a lot of, I don't know how to put it, but people who have, not treated you well, who have harmed you, who have belittled you, shamed you, made you feel bad about yourself, it's really hard to see like the good in who you are. And like, even if you truly are like a remarkable person that is a really unique person and have so many gifts and so many things you value that you add to the world, you cannot be connected to that. You don't see that necessarily in yourself. And I always say to people who say, I don't care what people think about me, I know who I am, and who cares if they like me or not. I don't think that's a good way of looking at, or productive way of looking at the world. I think that I think it's important to have self-value and self-worth, and be able to have that in the face of people who and things in life and experiences in life that make it hard for you to remember that. But I also do do think there's importance in seeing yourself through the eyes of other people, because if a lot of people are telling you the same thing, there's probably some truth in that, and you probably need to take a step back and look at yourself, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But what I had at that time was I had a couple people like this person in my life. I called her Mama Cat. That's what I called her, Mama Cat. Her name was Catherine, and there were a couple people in my life, couple women in my life, older women in my life at the time, although everyone was older than me at that time when I was, a teenager, but who said, like, you are a truly special person. Like, you are a good person, a special person. You're going to go far. You have a lot to offer. Whatever you put your mind to, like, you're going to be able to do. Like, you're just a really smart kid, a very talented kid. Like, that got me, even though life kind of was crappy, that got me through that really challenging time. So,
Well, and Charles, I don't believe that there's anybody on the planet who doesn't want to hear that, who doesn't want to hear that they're special and they have potential. But sometimes we're just, we want to kind of hole up, and we want to protect ourselves. And so we're like, hey, I don't care what other people say, but my dad taught me this, is that, everybody wants to be acknowledged. I mean, everybody wants to be seen for who they are. And unfortunately, some people aren't. And so they have to develop kind of a protective barrier almost. So Charles, that's so interesting, but we'll keep moving forward, because I'm sure we're going to jump back into that idea. But okay, so you knew you wanted to leave, you left, and then you were taken into this home. And then what happened for you as far as a trajectory with what you wanted to do with your life, and where did you go from there?
yeah, so it's a long story, but I'll keep it short in terms of, that short-term stay at that Mama Cat's house, and that turned into being able to rent a room on my own. So I was working, and so I rented a room for a year, figured things out, and then went away to college, in northern Florida, and then ultimately went to Minneapolis, St. Paul, because I wanted to get as far away from Florida as I could. So I decided, this born and raised Floridian who had seen snow one time and experienced, like, sub-freezing temperatures only a few times in his life, decided to move to Minneapolis, St. Paul. So I graduated college from the University of Minnesota, and then went to grad school again. But throughout, I was, I knew I wanted to be a therapist. And so I had a fantasy of being like this vision of being a therapist, teaching college. Remember Prince of Tides with Barbara Streisand? She was a college faculty member and was a therapist. And that was sort of my vision for myself. And that's what I wanted. And so by 30, I had accomplished that. I was a faculty member at a university. I had a private practice, and but you would think that I would be, over the moon and very happy and very fulfilled, but that was not the case. I had a lot of work to do. Again, it's a lifelong journey when you experience some of the things that I've experienced, that I'm sure some listeners will be able to identify, and really anything, by the way. I talk to people who have experienced parental divorce, the loss of a child, the loss of a sibling. It's all a lifelong journey to heal through those experiences and make sense of them. They change you forever. And so it didn't matter how many accomplishments I had, how many degrees I got, how much people said, wow, you should be so proud of yourself, you're so resilient. Like, I had to find my path to peace and to happiness, which I'm still, by the way, on, but definitely a lot further along. And so basically, I've taught periodically throughout the years. I've worked at various nonprofits. I was a licensed therapist. And then ultimately got more into nonprofit management, and then ultimately became an executive director of my previous organization in Boston, and then this current organization in San Francisco. And I skipped a lot of other little pieces, but maybe we can get back to them, I'm sure.
Thank you so much for sharing your life story, and what I'm guessing, or I would love for you to speak on, is like how that has fed into your current role, and how does that, your own life experiences impacted how you actually lead your organization?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there are a few things that are really unique about At the Crossroads. And I came to the organization for that for the principles that drive the organization, and they're principles that I've infused really in all of my work over the years. But there are, you know, there are a lot of misperceptions about the nonprofit sector or nonprofit organizations, and at the end of the day, though, I don't think very few people want government to do everything, right? They don't want, like, there's so much help that's needed and so much support that people need. And, you know, I don't think we want government to do all of it. And so the question is, who's going to do that? And we have the nonprofit sector for a reason. The nonprofits are an extension of the community. They are, you know, not everybody can actually do the work that At the Crossroads does or that I do on a daily basis. The community, you know, invests in organizations, nonprofit organizations, and invokes their, you know, their confidence, their trust in us to do the work, and ensure that the most vulnerable in the community are getting the support that they need. So I take that responsibility really seriously. And at the same time, I think the nonprofit sector, just like government entities, and, you know, I just read this article about the CEO at a company that fired like several hundred people, a video call, you know, like we every sector has its issues and poor practices or, you know, mismanagement, et cetera. So nonprofits are not an exception. So the first thing is that, you know, I believe that who you are, much more than what you know, is what impacts people. And so you should constantly be evolving and developing your skills of just, you know, in how effective you are as a human being, how much you relate to people, how well you show up for people. And so that's one of the things that I think is so special about At the Crossroads is that we're an organization that provides unconditional support to youth and young adults that we work with. And what that means is we never kick people out. So you can literally cuss out one of our counselors during a counseling meeting, and we're still going to work with you. You can literally be unsafe in our building where we're like, we can't have that person in our building due to safety issues, and we are going to find an alternative way to work with you, even if it's that we can only talk to you on the phone or meet with you in public places, whatever it may be. You can leave and we don't hear from you for a year, and you come back and you say, I'm back, can I get some help? We're going to provide help. So that, I think, is very much missing in a lot of our programs.
Charles, a couple things came to mind when you were talking. One is the idea of integrity, because you were talking about, you know, who you are is more important than what you do. And I think that's actually one of our hero making traits is integrity. And it's being the person that you are outside, that you are inside. And that takes self-awareness, right? Like it takes us kind of dealing with everything that's made us who we are, like the broken places and all of this, and saying, okay, how did that form my identity? And so is there a benefit? And then I'm going to jump to my other thought, because you had like this unconditional love idea is really powerful. Is there a benefit for you having experienced kind of this foster care, kind of difficult upbringing, homelessness for acute time, leading this type of organization? Is there something that makes somebody from your background more qualified to do this work, or does it not matter? Is this something that universally people can pick up because all of us have experienced something?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, Laurie, I think so when I used to run an organization that was largely volunteer based, and most of the volunteers did not represent the clients that we were serving, right? They came from very different backgrounds. Most of the young people that we worked with were youth of color that were they were living in poverty, had pretty much lived in poverty their whole lives. And most of our volunteers were white. They were women, older women, and from more affluent backgrounds. And so there was this idea of like, how effective could these volunteers be? They don't get it. They're not going to be able to get it. They come from a completely different world. And I hear that to a certain extent, and there's certain things that we're never going to get if we haven't lived those experiences. But per your point, I do think that it again, it's about how you show up, and the kindness and the compassion, and the self-awareness again, that is key. Is that you understand that you only know what you know, and you understand that you have limitations in terms of how much you can connect or how quickly you can connect to people. But what I realized was that, what people were looking for was they were looking for someone to listen. They were looking for somebody to be compassionate and caring and non-judgmental and just available, and just to sit with them in their pain, in the things that they were experiencing, even if they couldn't fix it, right? Because usually we can't fix the things that people are going through, or the challenges they're going through. So to answer your question, I think that my experience probably certainly has driven me in the work that I do, and probably, or I'm sure, has made me fairly effective or very effective in certain respects. So for example, like this unconditional model support and non-judgmental sort of approach to doing the work that I do, I'm sure the reason why it resonates with me so much is because I had such a lack of that, right? Even from the very people who are supposed to offer it to you. So whether it was, clearly my birth family was not able to care for me, my adopted family, in some ways, I really felt let down by, and were not unconditional, and in many ways disowned me, when I left my home. And so like the very people who were supposed to offer that unconditionality didn't do that. So I definitely think that has driven me in my career. And it's also something that I think that people deserve. Like, at a very human level, we are human beings. We are alive, and we are all connected. And regardless of the choices we make, how we present out into the world, there are very basic fundamental things that we all deserve. And the fact of the matter is every day in this country, there are so many people who don't even have those basic, rights, cared for. And like, that's what part of what Act the Crossroads is about, is to say, we're drawing a line in the sand, and we're saying, you deserve compassion, you deserve food, you deserve shelter, you deserve warm clothing. Like, no one should be without those things. So
yeah, I think that there's an opportunity here for like a lot of growth for all of us, in the sense that, there's some, right, there's like two trains of thought. One is that you have to, in order to be empathetic, you have to have gone through a similar experience. The other is that there's kind of these universal principles, and all of us have the ability to address them, right? But I think it could be easy for some people who haven't experienced homelessness. I've never experienced it. I've never been in the foster system. It could be easy to say, you know what, I'm going to go this far to try to understand, but that's as far as I could go, instead of going farther and saying, what are the commonalities here? So can you talk to us a little bit about the youth that you work with? What are the situations that they're coming out of? What do we need to know in order to better educate ourselves and become more empathetic friends to these people? Tell us a little bit about what we need to know here.
Yeah, I most of my career I've worked with youth in foster care. A lot of work around youth aging out of foster care, and especially younger children in foster care. It's not hard to find compassionate, investors, people who are, concerned. But at some point, when a child becomes old enough, their level of how people perceive their innocence and their level of responsibility shifts, right? So at 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, and certainly by 18, young adulthood, all of a sudden that innocent child that we want to protect and we want to care for, they no longer exist, right? And so I think that first of all, one of my principles is that we have an obligation to care for one another indefinitely. Like, whether somebody's 60 years old on the streets, or involved in our systems in some way, criminal justice system, or criminal system in some way, or, people who are, just whatever the context, like we have an obligation to care for people. And I think what I'm able to do based on my work, but I ask and sort of challenge people to do, is look at the person that's in front of you or the person that you're seeing and just rewind, like, challenge yourself to rewind and see where that person has come from, not to necessarily justify why they are where they are so that you can, be more sensitive, understanding, but to see that person's humanity, see what they have been through. Because at the end of the day, the person that's in front of you that needs support, needs kindness, needs compassion, etc., most likely, it's our responsibility. We have failed that person, which is really why you see disproportionately people who are experiencing homelessness experience foster care. So they were once kids who were in the foster care system that we never actually, cared for in the way that we should have cared for, and they aged out of foster care and ended up on the streets. They are people who, ended up incarcerated because maybe, they made a decision, a poor decision that has affected the rest of their lives, and they exited, incarceration, and there was very little resources for them, very few people who would help them. There are people who have lived in poverty, who grew up in poverty, who have never been provided the equal opportunities or access or resources to get out of poverty. And so they have always been just trying to survive and keeping their heads above water. And, they didn't have resources to, keep them from ending up, unhoused and on the streets. So homelessness is a symptom of, in my view, and by the way, also talking about addiction and mental illness and the lack of resources for people around those particular challenges. So I challenge us all to think about, like, homelessness is a symptom of so many other social issues that we are not addressing. So I almost become indignant around, like, how dare we then give up on people when they're on the streets, and in many ways, so we're sort of desensitized to that, and we've sort of objectified people who are on the streets as basically outcasts and people who are beyond, caring for and helping, and so that's not okay to me.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think that what you're saying is that even with your biological parents and then your foster parents, I think that everybody has a certain amount of, like, their own journey towards healing, but also, their own brokenness and inability to be everything that you needed. And also the system, it's not perfect. It has a lot of it's a broken system. So, and then how is it supposed to, like, actually take care of all of these, like, people, human beings? And so I think that's really a huge statement. And even though it certainly wasn't the best situation that you were in, it helped you see at a really personal level the brokenness of that system. And then now you can speak with credibility, and you're like, this is what it is, and let's do better, and let's take care of people and not give up on them. It reminded me of this person who I know who also experienced a momentary homelessness and addicted to alcohol, but now is actually teaching and has a PhD and is teaching in Vancouver, the University of British Columbia. So do we know that those people, like you know what I mean? Like, you are a licensed therapist. Like, what if we had seen you at, let's say, 17, would we have known that? But not to give up hope, but actually maybe have a vision for who they can become with healing and with care. So what do you say about that? I mean, do you communicate that to your staff and to your guests and your people?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we talked about, I think Laurie, you and I offline, about this idea of, like, we feel that the sky's the limit for our clients, and they may not feel that way. Others in the community may not feel that way, but we are, like, steadfast in holding on to that belief even when people don't have that belief about themselves, because at the end of the day, we've seen so many stories of, people who've experienced homelessness, who have not had their children, who have become, who have opened up their own businesses, and, or by the way, maybe they haven't opened their business and graduated college, but they are housed and they've maintained steady housing and have been, experience a level of stability that they wouldn't have already, normally experienced, because really success looks different depending on who you are. For some people, just being at peace and having some level of stability in their lives and being housed and having their basic needs met is success. And quite frankly, it is, because there are so many people. I mean, I look at it as success, and I think about it every day. When I talk to my son and he's like, we're not eating until 7:30, like clockwork, he will always remember this when he's older, and he'll probably say the same thing to his kids if he has children. Is what I say to him is, you know what, bud, I have dinner on my table. Like, it's maybe 7:30 or 8 o'clock that we're eating, but I feel so blessed that I have this food, that it's 40 degrees outside, but it's 70 in here. Like, those we just can't take for granted. So I do think, I think wherever people want to go in their lives, I want them to have a belief that they can get there. And yeah, I mean, I'm not naive to think, like I was when I was younger, that I could do anything I put my mind to. I actually don't believe that's the case, because there are limitations. But what really is disheartening to me is when people have unnecessary limitations placed on them. Like they have potential that is unmet because they haven't been provided opportunities or the support to get there. And so that's always kind of my barometer in my personal work with the clients I've worked with, and my agency's work, is that we do everything we can to remove barriers for people and provide them every resource we can so they can live to their fullest potential. It's how they define it. So,
Charles, I love that. And I was actually thinking about, what does measuring success look like to you before you answered it. And so I want to, on your website, you have this great statement, and it says, we believe that there are no limits to what our clients can achieve, and that everyone deserves the chance to build an outstanding life. And I was like, what is an outstanding life? What does that look like? And I'm wondering, is part of, and our role as cheerleaders in that too, right? Like, I think as Heromakers, the best thing we can do is just keep cheering people on and saying, you know what, you're doing great. Like you're going, you keep going, don't give up. But I'm wondering about the different dimensions of an outstanding life, like in terms of how do you help some of these kids care for themselves, like emotionally, physically, spiritually, if there's an element to that, relationally, socially, what are the different factors that lead to an outstanding life, like in your experience?
Yeah. It's kind of going back to this idea of a journey. I mean, it's going to look different depending on who you talk to, right? So an outstanding life for myself might look different than the two of you. And it looks different for our clients, but in some ways it's very similar, right? I mean, we just recently did a survey of all of our clients, or many of our clients, and, the things that they want for themselves and, are very similar to what anybody wants for themselves, right? People just want to feel safe. They want to have their basic needs met. They want to be productive. The reality is that a majority of people who are experiencing homelessness or instability, or who are living in poverty, who are struggling with mental illness or addiction, they all want the same thing, which is we were talking about this earlier, but they want to be loved. They want to be productive. They want to contribute. I say to folks that it's very rare that I meet people that don't want to be productive, that don't want to contribute. If it on the surface it looks like they don't want to be productive and they don't want to contribute, it is largely because they are probably not in a good place, right? Because healthy people make healthier decisions and are productive in some respect. So I think that one of the things that we offer at the organization that we think is so important, to partly answer your question, Laurie, is that we we offer very long-term relationships. We work with clients from late teens, if they come to us in their late teens, all the way to late 30s. So we're a very unique organization in that, we could work with clients up to 20 years and then still stay engaged with them, typically informally. So, and the reason why we do that is because supporting somebody in building and sustaining an outstanding life, whatever that looks like for them, is a lifelong journey. And so if we are, and we have been in so many cases, like the chief cheerleader for the young people we work with, and that support, even through the roller coaster of life and bad moments and good moments, that support has helped that young person continue to forge ahead closer and closer to the life they want for themselves. Why would we then say, you know what, you've aged out of our support, we've offered you 5 or 10 years of support, but we can no longer be in your corner because of some arbitrary aging out number, et cetera. So we just have removed that, and we've said, we're going to stick by people as long as it takes, and as long as they want us, and they feel like we're being supportive.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I recently heard like this idea, this quote, I've heard it before, but I heard it recently again, which it reminded me a little bit about what you're saying. And it's kind of this idea that the saddest thing is when you have a goal and you reach that goal, and then you realize there's nothing after that. And so like, I think sometimes when we hear the word success or all of that, it's like some tangible thing we're trying to reach, like working at a university or being a therapist or something. But then you get there and you're like, like maybe there's a sense of being let down. So what I love about what you're saying is, I think sometimes it's helpful not to look at a goal, but to look at the journey, right? Like the journey that we're carving for ourselves. Like in these moments, where are we having these joy? Where are we having connection? What are we have, all these good things. And I love how you, like this whole idea of unconditional love, like that you took, like some of your own journey is these points of not experiencing that. Something was missing. And then and this is something you knew had to exist, like unconditional love, which honestly, Charles, is very hard for most people, unconditional love, right? Because we are human and we reach breaking points.
yes.
So there's two thoughts there, but I guess in light of those two things, what I'm wondering is like with the youth that you work with and the adults, what are some of the most significant, where do you see that people find the most joy? Is it in, is it more in an educational, I got my degree? Is it in a relational, I have somebody I can trust? Like, where are these intersections of joy or success that you see in this big journey of life for them?
Yeah, sometimes it's really small things, as we were saying earlier, and sometimes it's what, at least what we might think small things, and sometimes it's really big things. Sometimes it's I haven't used in a week. Sometimes it's I was able to get off the streets and get housing and get into my first apartment, which is sometimes the most. We help sometimes with young people when they get their first apartment, helping them kind of tour apartments and get their first place and move in around pots and pans. And that just always really excites me. I don't know why. I mean, I remember how excited I was when I got my first apartment, and just being part of that process with certain young people is pretty exciting. Other times, and another really exciting milestone, for lack of better putting it, is when we have young people who have their children removed and are reunified with their children. I mean, those are really big moments too, because I can't identify with what it's like to have your child removed from you. I've worked with hundreds of people who have, And even then, and even though I was removed from my mother and my son was removed from his mother, like I can understand it at a very personal level in many ways, but to be a parent and have your child removed, the trauma around that, regardless of whether you've maybe you can't care for your child at that particular time, so seeing those reunifications is just really heartening. So it really just it really runs the gamut, in terms of what I've witnessed and celebrated with young people that I've worked with over the years, and at the same time, it's as you said, it can be short-lived because there's the work ahead that's required to maintain it, and there's the work ahead to maintain mental health, in terms of your mental health, because sometimes that's a roller coaster. And so your achievements, especially if you really have had a long path to get to those places, they can feel very momentary, or they can feel very volatile because you're waiting for the shoe to drop. And so, on the further along the road, we certainly have experienced relationships with clients where they've been able to maintain that level of stability and for a longer period of time, and that also is something that I really appreciate witnessing, because I know how long it took people to get to that place. So
That's good.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and by the way, I think about that for all of us. I mean, the reality is we are, one, I mean, I'm just thinking of examples, but like one loss away and one, divorce away, or one whatever away from
one bad decision away. Yep.
One bad decision away from our foundation just being pulled from underneath us. And so it's something that I never take for granted.
Yeah.
As you're speaking, I think the thing that strikes me is the longevity that you have with your clients, that you are, committing to a long-term healing process and really working with them. And I think that even that alone would just give a lot of hope to people, especially when they are like, oh, I don't need you anymore, I got it. And then they realize I don't got it, and it's like, okay, but to know that they can rely on you guys. And so I just want to kudos to you for doing that. And also just like, so do you guys like celebrate? Because I think it's important to like celebrate those moments, and what does that look like?
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the things that, as you say that, and we don't celebrate enough, probably. And it's one of the things that I made a commitment to our organization and to our staff, was to sort of increase capacity for people to do their jobs and slow down a little bit, focus on other things besides the day-to-day like tasks, but be involved with like other aspects of like, creating a vision for the organization and some key initiatives that we're working on that aren't necessarily directly related to the direct service, and getting everybody involved in those things. And so I think, our counselors do a good job of, in smaller groups sort of celebrating, but I think nonprofits are often in sort of scarcity mindset and doing the work and focusing on the clients that I think way too often we forget to celebrate. And so, I think we do a better job probably than we used to do to doing that. But I think that's important. And when you're in like mission-driven work, I think you're kind of socialized not to do that, and that can be really kind of depressing, right? So
Oh, sorry, Laurie, which is the person we interviewed who actually has her own organization having birthday parties?
Oh yeah.
You
yeah, Beverly's birthdays. Yeah. That was season 1, I think. Yeah.
She's in the Indianapolis area?
No, she was out in Pittsburgh.
Chicago? Oh, Pittsburgh. Anyway, but she was talking to a little girl and it was her birthday, and she's like, oh, what are you gonna have for your cake? She's like, I've never had a birthday cake.
Oh, yeah.
So like even birthdays, maybe you guys should like connect, because she now I think is expanding what she's doing.
Yeah, I think I've heard a couple different folks doing this, and like we do, staff celebrations, and we do memes for like people's birthdays that are really funny, and it reminds me when I was working in Santa Cruz, California, at a nonprofit, and we worked with a lot of children in foster care, and our volunteers would take sometimes children to the beach, out in the community to get lunch, etc. And you would not believe, in Santa Cruz, California, the number of children who had never seen the ocean that lived in an ocean town, right? I mean, and for various reasons, but or I didn't have a birthday cake, so we used to have birthday parties at the organization for some of the kids or children, and so yeah, and by the way, just one thing I was thinking about that I just wanted to bring up around this idea of unconditionality, which I don't know if that's a word or not, but
it is now.
It is now. I've thought about this with my own son, who is just a beautiful soul and an amazing personality, and has had his own challenges. And he's 13 going on 14. I've been starting to think about what life might look like in a few years, because quite frankly, and I don't know if some parents can identify with me, but I'm very clear that my boundary is that my son is not going to be living with me at 21, 22, 25 years old. So that's my boundary, and I'm going to stick to it. So anyway, but I think like there's going to be some challenges, and we've talked about like we can only protect him so much, and if he makes bad decisions, he has to live up to the consequences and what that could look like. And I've seen so many examples of parents who they're unable to separate custody and caring for somebody on a day-to-day basis, or like being responsible for somebody. They can't separate that from like unconditional love and regard, right? And I think I think we need to do a better job at that, because we can still show up for people, which is so important. We may just need to show up for them in a different way. And so when things get complicated in relationships with people, what we decide to do sometimes is just not show up at all. And that's not necessarily what we need to do. So I just wanted to kind of go back to that point. And that's the principle in which we are driven by it at the Crossroads. We may have to show up for you in a different way depending on the circumstances, but we're going to continue to show up for you.
Yeah, I think, Charles, like we're just living in a world too that requires us to be thoughtful caregivers. Like we have to, like what you said, unconditional love doesn't mean I'm your yes man. It means sometimes it's going to hurt, but I'll be there for you. And I think that's how we all need to engage the world right now as well, is because there's a lot of complex issues, and there's a lot of people who think differently than we think. And it requires us to, one, like you said, rewind, right? Like go back and try to consider like what is their story? What is their narrative that led us to this point? And then also say, okay, in light of that, I'm going to be somebody who is not going to run away when things get hard, but I'm going to press into people who need love. And so, Charles, this has been a fascinating discussion, and I wish that we had more time to kind of take a deep dive into some of these topics. But how can people support at the Crossroads if they don't live in the Bay Area?
Sure. I mean, I think looking at thecrossroads.org and learning more about the organization and what drives us, my information is on the website. People can feel free to shoot me an email and engage in conversation that way. Going back to showing up. So if people want to, have more discussion, I'm happy to do that. And, I think just taking the information in and thinking about, like relating it to, even if you can't support at the Crossroads, or, you can support other organizations and initiatives in your local communities. I think the message I really want to come across is that, and I think you mentioned this earlier, Laurie, that really, like, we're talking about some very pervasive social issues that I think are very daunting, and people think are just like they just can't be fixed, they can't be addressed. But at the end of the day, I realize the issues that At the Crossroads working with, but I will tell you, each and every day At the Crossroads make sure that people are warm with warm clothing. They get, like, if we give a pair of socks on the street, and sometimes we're the only meal that somebody gets when we do outreach or we work with clients over a hot meal. And while that may not seem like, maybe it seems like a drop in the bucket of what needs to be done. Like it has to be done. Like people need to eat, and even just a compassionate, kind human being in someone's life for a very short period of time sometimes is enough to sustain people until they're able to get where they hopefully can get.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So those small gestures are really important.
Yeah, so good. Well, Charles, we celebrate you here at the Heromakers, and as you guys go around, do your great work over there, just know that we're going to be the one cheerleading for you guys, even as you may skip over those moments. But yeah, ability and celebration is great. So do it, because it's like you guys are doing such great work, and we're thankful that you've been on the podcast with us. And we hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Please share it with friends and like us and all those good things. We'll see you guys next time.